What do you get when you take the quaint coziness of a human zone, destroy it with a plague, fill it with undead, and superimpose it with a gloomy, dark medieval atmosphere? Somehow, you get something that still retains that essential element of coziness, just in a spookier form. You get the Tirisfal Glades. Welcome back to the World of Warcraft Zone Retrospective series, where we take a trip down memory lane and revisit some of our favorite WoW zones, looking into their lore, narrative design, quests, gameplay, layout, shared experiences, and other unforgettable qualities, to hopefully answer the question, what is it exactly that makes each zone so special? In today's episode, we're headed to the northernmost reaches of the Eastern Kingdoms to explore the gloomy heart of the fallen kingdom of Lordaeron and the humble starting zone of the Forsaken. Let's start by exploring the geography and key landmarks that define the zone. Tirisfal Glades lies at the center of the Kingdom of Lordaeron, bordered by the haunted Silverpine Forest to the southwest and the Plaguelands to the east, with only a thin line of Forsaken defenses at the bulwark separating them. To the north lies the North Coast, a long stretch of shoreline made nearly inaccessible by murlocs. And toward the middle of the zone is Tirisfal's only geographical feature, Brightwater Lake. While Tirisfal doesn't have a large number of set pieces, the ones you do find carry a lot of weight. In the northeast lies the Scarlet Monastery, its spires jutting into the ghostly green sky to create an imposing silhouette. The area is fraught with danger, from the corpses hanging from trees to the high-level elites patrolling the grounds. New undead adventurers won't make it far up the path to explore its halls until much later, but its looming presence is unmistakable and contributes heavily to the overall sense of unease you're meant to feel while you explore Tirisfal. Perched atop the hills in the northwest, the Agaman Mills stand as perhaps the single most fondly remembered area of Tirisfal, thanks in no small part to its haunting aesthetic. The story behind the mills adds even more depth, but we'll cover that a bit later. The decrepit windmills set against the gloomy sky, the distant moonlight, and the numerous undead wandering the ruins all combine to create an unforgettable, eerie atmosphere. There's a reason the mills earned a cameo in the original intro cutscene. The spooky vibes here are truly unmatched. To the south, bordering Lordemere Lake, lie the ruins of Lordaeron, a somber reminder of the kingdom's tragic past and one of the coolest major city approaches in the entire game. And in the center of the zone is Brill, a small market town that used to stand as an important site for trade and culture before the onset of the plague. As for the rest of the zone, it's littered with crumbling watchtowers, most of which have been taken over by members of the Scarlet Crusade, dilapidated farms that are by and large overrun by the Scourge, and empty hills crawling with plagued creatures. These landmarks don't just define the layout of Tirisfal, they also contribute to its most differentiating quality, its atmosphere. As you may have picked up by now, atmosphere is the single most unique thing that sets Tirisfal apart from other zones. From the haunting music and melancholy themes to the ghoulish green sky and never-ending night, every element contributes to its bleak feel. In fact, in the entire game, the only other zone that comes remotely close is Duskwood, which is a fantastic zone for a lot of similar reasons, but Tirisfal is a starting zone, and the fact that it's already reaching these heights of immersive brilliance the second you set foot into the zone is quite the accomplishment. Starting zones are faced with a difficult task. They need to acclimate you to the world, teach you the game's mechanics, show you how to interact with other players, and most importantly, hook you into the gameplay loop. And for that reason, it can be easy to diminish player immersion due to the sheer amount of information coming at them. Most starting zones avoid this by making you feel like an upstart adventurer, full of wonder and anticipation for the long road ahead, with a wide open world just waiting to be explored. Tirisfal doesn't do it this way. Yes, you get the same tutorials, the low difficulty curve, the slow ramp that leaves you feeling ready for the next stage of your adventure. But instead of a sunny meadow or a serene snowscape, you get a land ravaged by death. Instead of quirky kobolds or harmless boars, you're up against plague-rotted bats and wolves, or the Scarlet Crusade, whose entire existence is predicated on cleansing the world of your kind. Or worse yet, the rotting remains of everyone you used to share this land with before the plague. Suffice to say, where other starting zones feel bright and inviting, a happy proving ground to help you find your footing, Tirisfal feels different. The whole environment is thicker, more dangerous, and entirely hostile to you, the player. Every starting zone has its charms, and some of them might even be objectively better, but none of them are quite so unique as the Tirisfal Glades. And of course, that's no accident. It's a deliberate design choice that's closely tied with the zone's infamous backstory, which begins with the tragic history of Lordaeron. If you've read the World of Warcraft Chronicle, or spent time watching channels that deal in post-Wrath WoW lore, Tirisfal's history might look to you like monumental battles between titans and old gods, the guardians of Tirisfal, or the birthplace of humanity on Azeroth. That's all well and good, but here I do my best to pretend nothing after the original trilogy exists. I much prefer the tone, perspective, and ambiguity of pre-Kata WoW, especially vanilla, and will always try to keep my lore sections focused on those days of WoW yore. So originally, Tirisfal had no cosmic backstory. In fact, according to the WoW diary, it wasn't even named until just before launch. Throughout the game's development, it was simply dubbed the Undead Newbie Zone. But that doesn't mean there aren't some direct sources, breadcrumbs, and inferences we can use to piece together its history. Tirisfal, like the rest of Lordaeron, was once a pristine stretch of pastureland known for its fertile soil. It was this promise of opportunity that attracted its first settlers out of the kingdom of Erethdor to the south. Families like the Agamans, Solidans, and Balnirs were among the earliest to establish roots in Tirisfal, and they would go on to be the wealthiest producers in the area for generations to come. But as the kingdom of Erethdor began to fracture, others soon followed their lead. Taranis Menethil I would split away from Erethdor and go on to found the Kingdom of Lordaeron in Tirisfal, which would eventually extend from Thoradin's Wall to the borders of the Elven lands. For most of its history, the kingdom enjoyed peace, until it was attacked by orcs during the Second War, and after that, it would pretty much never know peace again. Not much more than 10 years later, under the Lich King's command, the necromancer Kel'Thuzad and his Cult of the Damned unleashed the plague of undeath on Lordaeron, setting off a chain of events that would unfold into one of the most iconic stories in Warcraft history. There are plenty of long expositions on what comes next, so we'll just cover the high points here. Blinded by his desire for vengeance against the Plaguebringers, Prince Arthas Menethil follows the Lich King's agents back to Northrend to exact his revenge. There, he finds the cursed blade Frostmourne and succumbs to the Lich King's influence himself. Arthas returns to Tirisfal at the head of a Scourge army, murders his father to seize the throne of Lordaeron, then rampages across his homeland, eventually butchering his way to Quel'Thalas, where he kills Sylvanas Windrunner and twists her into his Banshee servant. During this conflict, the Lich King's power began to wane. Sylvanas breaks free of his control and seizes the chance to kill Arthas, but in her desire to make him suffer, she only manages to wound him before he escapes back to Northrend, leaving the Scourge in the area leaderless. Sylvanas then rallies an army of undead free from Scourge control, mounts an assault on the Scourge-held capital of Lordaeron, and reclaims its sewers and crypts, transforming this undercity into the stronghold for her new undead faction, the Forsaken, which she continues to strengthen by liberating more Scourge agents from the Lich King's grasp. So that's the narrative overlay, but what about Tirisfal itself? Well, throughout this saga, the human population of Tirisfal, much like the rest of Lordaeron, was all but entirely wiped out. Brill, along with Stratholme and Anderhall, was one of the first towns to receive one of the corrupted grain shipments that triggered the plague outbreak, hence the mass grave just outside the town. The same fate would befall virtually every other settlement in the region, including those of the first settlers, the Solidin, Balnir, and Agaman families. The plague victims of Tirisfal were given a second chance at life by Sylvanas. Those who had once served the Lich King were freed, now living with their own free will once again, but instead of returning to the quiet harmony of their farms and families, they're left to pick up the pieces of a ravaged homeland and figure out their place in a world that largely despises them. And that's exactly where you'll find yourself when you create a new undead character, and open your beady yellow eyes for the first time in the Shadowgrave. The central plot of Tirisfal revolves around the Forsaken's efforts to secure their hold on the region, rebuild their broken society, and establish their identity in the wake of their newfound undeath. It's a well-known fact that the developers spent considerably less time on the early Horde zones than they did on the Alliance. This is evident from the overall lack of depth in zone design and narrative complexity, but I have to say, this isn't felt as strongly in Tirisfal as it is in other Horde zones. The environment is top-notch, and in fact, between the Knoll Grave Robber to Fenris Keep connection and the narrative ties with the Plaguelands, it's maybe the only Horde starting zone that has its story beats carry over into other zones in any meaningful way. Your adventures in Tirisfal start in Death Knell, where you'll learn the basics of the game in your class before passing over into Greater Tirisfal, and eventually making your way to your first major quest hub, Brill. Brill's defense is commanded by the town's leader, Magistrate Severin, and the Death Guards, who direct new recruits in their efforts to contain Tirisfal's myriad threats: Scourge remnants, the humans of the Scarlet Crusade, the Gnolls, and the plague-ridden beasts. Thematically, the quests alternate between having you carry out the most diabolical acts imaginable on the one hand, and on the other, digging through the zone's tragic past to uncover some of the most heartbreakingly sad stories you'll encounter in your time on Azeroth. Take the Fields of Grief quest, for example, which has you go in dispatch of what are pretty much the only normal human civilians left in all of Lordaeron, steal off with their meager pumpkin crop, lace them with the plague, then go feed them to a captive Scarlet Crusader in the basement of the Gallows End Tavern, while you sit back and leisurely watch his flesh rot away. And A New Plague, where you go and gather the most vile substances possible throughout the zone, mix them into a beer, hand it over to a thirsty dwarf prisoner, and watch him chug it. I mean, I know we're at war with these people, but can't we just, kill them?
I want you to meet Daddy's nemesis, Austin Powers.
What, are you feeding him? Why don't you just kill him?
Then, on the other end of the spectrum, we have our Tales of Sorrow. Marlowe's Last Wish is one of the first quests you'll do back in Death Knell. It describes the tragic last moments of a Tirisfalian couple, when a husband who turned undead strangled his own wife. Despite her gruesome end, her last wish was to have her husband's remains retrieved and buried next to hers. Not quite sure how she got that information out while she was being strangled, but it's tragic nonetheless. The saddest in the zone, though, takes us full circle to finally find out what became of the Agaman family during the Scourge invasion. The entire questline that takes place at the Agaman Mills is iconic in its own right, in no small part due to the atmosphere of the mills itself. But while you're taking care of the Scourge holdouts at the Agaman Mills, you might happen upon a random drop, a letter written by Thurman Agamand. This letter, which is addressed to Thurman's love interest Yvette, tells the details of the night they fell to the Scourge, and it's quite the tragic tale. The Agamans, being the most prosperous family in Tirisfal, were amply supplied and well defended during the Scourge invasion, and may well have held their own if it weren't for the cowardice of the youngest child, Devlin. Devlin made a pact with the Scourge, allowing them to slip past their defenses to slaughter a third of the Agamans' forces while they slept, his family forced to watch on in horror. Despite their non-existent chances of survival, Thurman, being the honorable man that he was, stayed behind to see things through, ultimately facing the same fate as the rest of his family: to shamble about their home as mindless undead, now commanded by the very brother that brought doom to them all. You can bring Thurman's letter to Yvette in Brill. She'll learn of Thurman's fate and read that, tragically, his last thoughts were of her. And for a split second, reading this almost makes her feel something again. But before she can, Yvette remembers she's undead now too, and could care less about the love she used to feel in life. I honestly can't decide if that adds to the tragedy or takes away from it, but either way, the fate of the Agamans is a sad one, and I think it's cool that you would only really know what happened at the mills if you find the letter, which isn't even a guaranteed drop while you're questing there. Those few quests pretty well capture the overall tone of Tirisfal Glades. The task of going around the zone and assassinating the leaders of the Scarlet Crusade is memorable too, as is the Prodigal Lich, which has you running back and forth between Brightwater Lake and the Undercity to reveal the identity of a powerful Lich. Aside from that, you have your standard issue kill and collect quests, which also get some help from the overall theme of the zone as well. But regardless of the subject, Tirisfal's quests excel at defining the identity of the undead faction. In Undeath, they've turned cruel and heartless in many respects. But despite their new fate, they still have some semblance of humanity left in them. The living that they fight are often made out to be even more wicked than they are. And in moments when it comes to rebuilding their lands, advancing their cause, or reflecting on their lives as humans, you can almost get a glimpse of the people they might have been before they turned. And it's that ever-looming presence of melancholy that follows the player around and contributes to this signature atmosphere that makes Tirisfal such a compelling zone to play through, both narratively and thematically. Now, the atmosphere, quests, landmarks, and narrative are all massively important to the overall vibe that is Tirisfal, but like most things in WoW, it's the player's experiences and encounters that really bring each zone to life. I remember the first time I created an undead character, shortly after having burned out on my first toon, a troll hunter. Going from Durotar to Tirisfal was refreshing to say the least. Personally, I identified much more closely with the bleak, haunted environment of Tirisfal and was instantly enchanted by its themes and aesthetic. One of the moments I'll never forget is walking into Brill for the very first time. The whole look was just perfect, with its dilapidated buildings, sprawling cemetery, and signature ominous clock tower. Brill is up there among the best starting quest hubs in the original game. And despite all the dust, cobwebs, dimly lit lanterns, gaunt faces, and missing jaws, Brill still managed to give me that same warm and cozy feeling I imagine Alliance players get the very first time they step into Goldshire, just the spooky version. The same doesn't go for the Gallows End Tavern music, though. Even though you're just a few steps away from the tutorial area, something just clicks and you can immediately understand how massive this game was. There were dozens of players at various levels of progression, running around, spamming general chat with topics or requests for help on things I hadn't the faintest idea about yet. Trading, dueling, jumping on mailboxes, darting across the town wearing gear I would kill to get but had no idea where to find, or best of all, seeing the fresh level 40 run up to the stables, buy his first mount, then stand in the middle of town as everyone looks on in envy. Just coming to know the game and getting exposed to its vastness and eccentricities is one of those more magical WoW memories that no matter how many times you play, you can't ever quite recapture. To give another example of this, I remember running from Brill to go down to the Undercity for the first time. Of course, that moment when you first run around the corner and get confronted with this sprawling, eerie green underground necropolis is another core memory. But before I even got there, I was amazed to come across a small party of Alliance running down the road. At the time, I didn't know that they were making the trek from South Shore to the Scarlet Monastery. I thought they might just be looking for trouble. And I was at the same time terrified of the inherent danger they posed to me, and intrigued at how foreign they were made to feel to me. They were leagues beyond my level of skill or time investment at the time, with equipment I couldn't even comprehend. You can't understand their language, with your only communication relegated to gestures. This type of interaction went even further to highlight the vastness of the game. Not only is there a huge map for you to explore little by little, there's a whole other side of the world, an entire population of people playing this game that you'll never get to properly interact with. They were experiencing something entirely different than I was, but nevertheless, there we were, occupying the same digital space, staring at each other through 2004's rudimentary graphics and proto-social media features. Like I said at the beginning of this video, every starting zone has its unique flair, something that truly makes it stand apart from others. Much of that lies in their inherent design, but a lot of it is simply due to our first-hand experiences in the game. But that doesn't mean there isn't something wonderful to be found wherever that might be for you, as we'll see when we continue to explore everything there is to love about the spaces of vanilla World of Warcraft. Well, that just about does it for Tirisfal, a truly unique starting experience to WoW, dripping with creepy atmosphere, set against one of the most iconic lore events of the game, with one of the best dungeons to boot. Some of my fondest WoW memories come from Tirisfal, and while nostalgia plays a big role for me personally, there's a lot to love about this zone, whether it was one of your first forays into Azeroth or not. What stands out to you about Tirisfal? Are there specific quests, NPCs, or locations you think deserve a mention? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. And of course, if you're enjoying these trips down memory lane, please consider leaving me a like on the video or a sub to the channel. Thanks so much for watching. Till next time.